Welcome. We're very lucky today to have back Ellie Matz, the author of Auschwitz on the Potomac, 1943, Hillel Koch, The Attempt to Save European Jewry, and the Birth of the Israeli Nation. This is the paperback. It's also available in hardback, and you can get it at Amazon or order it at your local bookstore or ask your library to order it. It's a book in part about Peter Bergson during the Nazi extermination of the Jews of Europe, but it also has a great deal about Peter Bergson, Hillel Koch's actions to create Israel as a new nation after the war. And one of the issues that's come up a lot recently in discussions with Ellie is that of an Israeli identity separate from a Jewish identity. And this was raised during the war by Bergson, who said Jews were being killed because they had no national identity.
Political identity.
Political identity, thank you. And his attempts to create such, and his big disputes when he went back to Israel, was in the first Knesset to have a constitution and to define who is an Israeli, which is another book that Ellie wrote. And so he once said to me, you know, Israelis think their security comes from phantoms. This was many years ago. The Phantom was like the Iron Dome, the highest tech fighter. But it won't come from phantoms. It will only come from an Israeli identity. So I wanted to ask Ellie.
The definition of what an Israeli identity is.
All right, so let's Ellie can take it away. Tell us what that is.
Well, first of all, the issue of identity with Mr. Bergson was identity equals the national security of the Israeli nation. And it's like Einstein's energy equals mass, C, what do you call it, whatever. Anyway, listen, most Israelis and most American Jews could not figure it out. What does he actually say? Okay, so we'll have to go back a little bit here to explain what the problem is and how it's related to the national security of the Israeli nation. Okay, and it all, of course, starts in 1942, in May 1942, in the Biltmore Hotel in New York City, where Ben-Gurion assembled all the American Zionists in order to pass what we call the Biltmore Declaration. In that declaration, they summarized that the future of Zionism, or the situation in Palestine, will be one thing: a Jewish Commonwealth. And a Jewish Commonwealth is like talking about space, you know, rockets in space. It doesn't mean anything. Okay, politically, it doesn't mean anything, but it literally, it sounds like a fantastic idea. In any case, just at that time, Rabbi Newman, who was a Zionist and who started understanding the power that Mr. Bergson accumulated in the United States during the years 1941, 1942, decided to get Ben-Gurion and Mr. Cook, Mr. Bergson, together for a conversation in his apartment, and he was successful in doing so. And there was a long conversation in his apartment in New York. Rabbi Newman was a famous rabbi of a Reform synagogue or something like this. He was a famous Zionist. In any case, the conversation that lasted a few hours basically showed that the Zionists, with all their literature, with all their talk, with all their propaganda, never understood what they actually wanted. Okay? And on that, Bergson was very focused because he came from Jerusalem as a representative of the Irgun Tzva'i Leumi. Now, the Irgun is an organization, and everybody knows what an organization is. Tzva'i is military. Everybody knows what military is. Military is guns, revolvers, you name it. Jabotinsky theory of guns, okay? Which is also a big story in itself. And then there's a question. The third word of the Irgun was Leumi, which is nationality. And here was the obstacle. What nationality are we going to be? Zionism, in all its literature that is going on back 100 years ago, never explained what the issue of nationalism is or which nationality it is. And then, if you look carefully at the Israeli parliament decision 2 years or 3 years ago, they finally decided the nationality will be the Jewish people. And everybody knows that the Jewish people is not a sovereign political statement or definition. It's a nonsense, a political nonsense, because Jewish people doesn't define anything. There's Jews all over. Okay, and sometimes they are not people, sometimes they would like to be people, but Judaism is a religion. And anyway, after that Biltmore 42, Bergson worked in the year 1943 to establish some sort of an agency to save Jews. Okay, that was over. So in 1944, he established the Hebrew Embassy in Washington. Now, a Hebrew embassy in Washington was a phenomenon that Jews have never had in their last 2,000 years. Suddenly, a gentleman who's a Palestinian Israeli comes to Washington. He walks around all over, talks to government officials, people in the military, diplomats, all kinds of things, and he opens up an embassy which he declares the establishment of a Hebrew Republic. Now, what does a Hebrew Republic mean, according to him? It's a very simple thing. The Jews are moving from a status of no sovereignty to a status of sovereignty. And it doesn't matter if they'll speak Hebrew or Turkish or Spanish. That's not the issue. The issue is he wanted to declare the fact that Jews have a political identity. And that was the most important thing to declare in trying to figure out the Jews lost their political identity in the beginning of World War II. And that was the whole issue, according to Bergson. American Jews didn't lose anything. They were American citizens and the nationals of America, so they didn't feel anything. But Bergson felt that the disaster in Europe was partially came together because of the loss of political identity. In any case, what he tried to explain to America between 1944 to 1948 was a simple thing. In the future, by the way, he explained it to Ben-Gurion too, and to Weizmann, and to anybody else you can imagine. There are letters and documents about it. Okay, he said, if we are going to establish a nation, and it's going to be a modern nation, we will have to call the nation by a name, because we are going to declare its sovereignty. And he suggested Hebrew. But from his point of view, it could have been also Israeli. It doesn't really matter. But the issue was that it's going to be a new nation with sovereignty, a nation that will write a constitution, a nation that will deal with its neighbors on an equal level. We all know the story with the Palestinians. The Palestinians decided in 1948 that they don't want to be a nation. Okay, and by the way, that's part of the story. In any case, Bergson tried it in America. People understood him. People did not understand him. And it's really not that important. What's important was that the Zionists concluded, as a result of his raising the Israeli flag in May 1944 in Washington that Bergson is actually trying to create a government in exile. And as a result of it, they understood that he pulled the rag or the carpet from underneath their legs. And that was a green light or a red light to Ben-Gurion to act, to actually blow up the Altalena ship. Did you get it up to now?
Yes, thank you. That's very interesting. Could you talk a little bit? I don't think everyone knows what the altalena was, but just very briefly, you could explain that.
Larry, the altalena is not the issue. The issue is the altalena was blown. There was a ship of ammunition and people that came from France. It's not even important how they got it all together. What's important is that the issue started in May 1944 in Washington, when Bergson declared the formation of a Hebrew embassy and the future of an Israeli republic. That alerted all Zionists, normal Zionists who didn't understand from their right or left. Okay, they thought that he's trying to take over the leadership of Zionism. And between you and me, if he did take over, we wouldn't have been in the situation we are today. But historians, it takes a long time for historians to even to figure out what was that meaning of raising the flag in Washington. It was the most interesting event in Jewish history. Okay, and that is not understood till today, not after the establishment of Israel and not before the establishment of Israel. Now, if you don't declare yourself as an Israeli sovereign and you don't write a constitution, how can you understand Palestinian nationhood? You understand, if you want to be a Jewish nation, what does it mean politically? It means a disaster. In any case, Bergson failed, totally failed to explain the Israelis and the American Jews and the American in general, even though I think Truman understood it very well. That's why he declared his recognition of the Israeli nation. In any case, Bergson was a member of the Israeli parliament, Israeli Knesset. He got into arguments with Ben-Gurion over the issue of constitution, over a convention, how to become Israelis. The whole thing blew out of proportions, and the Ben-Gurion faction or the people who supported him decided in 1948 and 1949 that there is not going to be a written constitution. As a result of that, we got ourselves into a nightmare that is exploring itself or exploding today in Israel. Okay? Politically, militarily, and philosophically. In any case, I came to New York in the end of 1976 after I did some years of work with Wyman. Wyman wrote a book about the America's role in the Holocaust, which is a devastating book about America. It's not a simple one of those books that tells you a PhD dissertation. The book is a provocative book about the role America played in the Holocaust. When I came to New York, Wyman told me go and visit Bergson. So I went to visit him. At that time, Bergson left Israel. He had enough with Israel and this garbage there. I mean, he returned on and off, but he had enough with his thing because nobody could listen to him. Nobody wanted to listen to him. So in New York, he established an organization called the Institute of Mediterranean Affairs. Did you hear about that, Larry?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
The Institute of Mediterranean Affairs tried to explore the possibilities of peace in the Middle East. Okay, of course, and here there's something very interesting, which I wrote about in the book. The chief of the Israeli Mossad, Meir Amit, probably one of the most, I would say, probably the most prominent head of Mossad in Israel's history. This gentleman, I never met him, but Bergson met him. Okay, and they spoke. This gentleman, when he left his job, he was interviewed in Israel by a journalist. And I remember that because I'm an avid reader of newspapers since I was a kid. I never finished kindergarten, but I always read newspapers. In any case, in that interview, Mr. Amit, the chief of the Mossad, says a simple thing. If we are not going to integrate ourselves into the region, this whole experiment is garbage. Do you get it, Larry?
Yeah.
You understand what it means? He summarized the entire Israeli experience, okay, by saying that we not only that if we don't get integrated, we are going to collapse. It's impossible for us to live like this with hostilities. We got to find a way this thing. And of course, Bergson, who knew exactly what he was talking about, had this organization in New York. But the question was, how are we going to find a formula? What will be the formula to explain to the Israelis that they're actually a nation and not a tribe of Jews running around in the desert? Okay, that's why I wrote in those years what you call one of the first papers that I wrote, which is called "Who is an Israeli?" Basically, it's ideas I collected and spoke to Bergson for more than a year. Okay, now Bergson didn't like it, and he wrote me a letter about it, and I have the letter at home. And I decided, why should I argue with him? Okay, he sees it in one way, I see it in another way. Of course, I came eventually to understand that if I will follow his philosophy, okay, I will go astray. I will never be able to write a philosophy, because what Bergson wanted was an Israeli nation. But the Israelis don't want to be a nation. They want to be a Jewish state. A Jewish state is an impossibility. Okay? It cannot be a Jewish democracy.
Let's stop there though. The reason is because Bergson believed religion and nationality were two separate categories.
Right. The question is why did he believe? Well, I didn't tell you that Bergson, when he arrived in America, had one of the greatest teachers for American history and philosophy. And I think I told you who it was. It was Francis Gunter, the writer, the wife of the famous journalist, the woman who was connected to Nehru, the leader of free India. She went to Columbia. She went to Harvard. I mean, she was a really intelligent lady, and he associated with her. She wrote poems for him. She directed him. She was his lover. Okay, and as a result of that, he got himself one of the best education a person can, who comes from Palestine with no education whatsoever in political science. He got it here in America. Okay, and as a result of it, a lot of his ideas are coming from here. So separation of church and state, between religion and nationality, is very clear in America. Everybody understands what it is, but try to explain it to Jews. They start jumping from roofs when you tell them such a thing. Okay, so the question was, how do you explain it to them? Somebody had to write a theory down. That's what I tried to do with Who is an Israeli, to explain the whole thing, the whole political background for creating a nation of Israelis rather than a nation of schleppers, if you know what the word schleppers mean. Okay,
let me stop you there. And let's fast forward to what's happening today. You could make the case that with the current situation, you've got American generals in the war room. You've got Blinken sitting in the
but that's
cabinet.
not the issue.
That would mean
Those are
that the
not the issue.
country, just let me finish. That means the country is not acting as a sovereign nation.
You got it right. But the issues here are something different because America, listen, everybody talks about Kissinger, who just passed away. He was a waste of time, a political waste of time, but I don't want to go into details to explain why he was a political waste of time. It starts with his dissertation in Harvard. Okay, but I'm not going again. I read it, and I don't want to go into this thing. Every nation in the world always moves. Okay, between war and peace. Today there's war, tomorrow peace, and the next week there's another war. Okay, the issue in Israel, the reason for the wars in Israel has to do with identity. If the Israelis don't want to recognize that there are Palestinians on the West Bank and in Gaza, we are in constant war with them. Okay? The Israelis sometimes don't understand that political reality. Do you get that? The reason for the war today, at this moment, has to do with what Bergson predicted in 1944. Okay? I just wrote it down together in the end of the 1970s. Okay? It's a constant status of war because we don't want to recognize that Palestinians are human beings like us, and they need a political identity. They don't have a political identity, they have a problem. Okay, but think, for example, for a second, okay, if the Mr. Abbas or Mr. Hamas or Mr. Shmas goes tomorrow, stands up in New York tomorrow and says, listen, ladies and gentlemen, we decided to be a nation. And at this moment, we declare, now it's December 5th, we declare our sovereignty, and we are becoming a nation, and we are going to start working as a nation. Guess what the world how is the world going to react to that? Okay? The world is going to support them. But the Israelis don't want to recognize the fact that Palestinians are also human beings or can be a potential sovereign nation. Now, the issue here is with my proposal about the Swiss model has to do with a simple thing. The proximity of the Israeli-Palestinian experience up to now, which is 75 years after the establishment of the sovereign Israeli nation, is we are working together, but nobody wants to say that. 20% of Israeli doctors are Palestinians. The Palestinians are joining the Israeli numbers. Every year, more than 1,000 or 2,000 of them want to join the Israeli army, and they serve in the Israeli army. Nurses are in hospitals. They are Palestinians. So what is the obstacle here? You understand? The obstacles is misunderstanding of our nationality. And then we have the Druze. The Druze serve in the Israeli army, but they cannot be full Israeli citizens. What kind of nonsense is that? Just think about it. What about the Bedouins? They serve in the Israeli military, but they cannot be equal citizens. What kind of a nightmare is that? Do you get it?
I get it. Now, why was there never a constitutional convention? And do you think now, after this war is over,
no, it's not.
Do you think they could have a constitutional convention?
No, they cannot have a constitution because the constitution is going to be written for whom? You have to include the Palestinians in it because we have more than 500,000 Palestinians living among the Israelis. They call them Arabs. Arabs is a derogatory word. Israelis use it as a derogatory word. It's nonsense. You understand? They are Palestinians, and if they want to be Israelis, they can be Israelis. If they want to be Palestinians, let them be Palestinians. But they are not people who carry arms. They want to be part of the Israeli society. But I suggest that since we are in such a entrenched in a war between two nationalities here, they don't like to recognize each other. We need to make a statement about trying to be like a Swiss model. What the Swiss model is not only a political system. The Swiss model that was established 1,000 years ago, it was a philosophical idea, an intellectual idea. From now on, we are not fighting among ourselves. We are going to live in peace together with each other because we live in a proximity of that Swiss Republic. And that was the end. And for 1,000 years, it's working. So why shouldn't
So
the
your idea would be to have an Israeli republic like the Swiss Republic, which would
No,
have
no, 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 no,
cantons
no.
that would
No,
be Palestinian?
an Israeli Palestinian Republic. Not an Israeli Republic, an Israeli Palestinian Republic. One nation, okay, that will have
Then you're back to
cantons.
the nationality question.
There's always a nationality issue here. And we have to recognize that they are human beings like us. And
I
they
know,
were
but in Switzerland, the cantons, like you may have a French-speaking canton and a German-speaking canton and a Protestant canton and a Catholic canton, but then as a nationality, they're all Swiss.
That's
They don't
correct.
say
So we are
a
going
French-German
right.
nationality. They
So we
say
are
Swiss.
going
There's one
right.
nationality.
That's correct. So we are going to call the nation Israeli Palestinian nation or the Palestinian Israeli nation. It's going to be a nation combined of two nationalities that will function like the Swiss Republic.
But the Swiss is a federation. It's not a
Right.
nation.
And we are
what you're really talking about is a federation, an Israeli-Palestinian federation, and then you'd have an Israeli nation and a Palestinian nation within that.
No.
But that's how it works in Switzerland.
No. We whatever it is. I'm not an expert on Swiss law. No, nor do
you
I.
Better look it up because it's your model.
There's nothing. The issue is we have to stop the hostilities, and the hostilities have to stop by the recognition of what Bergson said in 1944. We are going to establish a nation, but the Israelis, and you see, it's so funny. It's so funny with the establishment of the Israeli nation. Ben-Gurion in 1948 calls up and makes a statement, what you call a Declaration of Independence. But if you read the Declaration of Independence, you don't understand what is the independence of. Is it a synagogue independence? What is it? He never defines it. You understand? And of course, a declaration like this is a Jeffersonian thing. Where did he get it from? He was a socialist. What did he understand of Jefferson? You understand? The Declaration of Independence of the Israeli nation is the biggest joke ever written on a piece of paper. In any case, this is not important. There has to be, if we are going to solve the Israeli-Palestinian problem, we'll have to deal with the issue of nationality. Okay? We have to respect each other's nationality. We have to respect each other's proximity to each other. We have to understand that we are actually working together already. Okay.
But let me ask you a question. When you worked for Bergson for 10 years and Merlin worked with him, did they propose such a federation? What was their proposal from the Institute for Mediterranean Affairs?
They actually wrote a document on it. They publicized in Israeli paper and in American papers their ideas about it.
Well, what was it?
Be specific. But they didn't listen. They were struggling with words. Okay, how do you take two hostile groups of people who each one claims his own nationality? One never declares it, and the other one declares but didn't declare it. You have to understand that it's very frustrating. Nationality is a very frustrating thing. This is not Polish nationality or Russian nationality here. Okay? The Jews have no nationality, and the Palestinians never had any nationality. For 2,000 years, Jews were not a nationality. They were a religious group of people. Think about it. How do you suddenly you wake up in the morning and you become a nationality? You have to prepare the ground for that. Okay, in any case, my interest has been always, since I was a kid, growing up in Israel and reading the Israeli papers and reading books. I have thousands of books at home dealing with the subject matter. And by the way, I also argued with some writers in Israel about it. Okay, for one of them is Aleph Bet Yoshua, who passed away recently. Okay, I argued with him about this. Bergson also argued with him. Okay, in any case, we need to find a way through the issue of nationality to fix that, to arrest that hostility and come up with some sort of an intellectual way to express our feelings, in which we are going to express them in such a way that we are not going to carry bare arms, but rather start working with each other in order to fix this issue of nationality.
Okay, I agree with you on that, but you say Bergson wanted to have a federation, and he published papers on this. What did the papers say should be done?
We have to find a way to get together. Listen, it's an intellectual thing. Listen, he got together with Professor Yosef Agassi, okay, and they wrote a book about nationality. I mean, Agassi, Bergson never wrote anything, but Agassi wrote a book on nationality, and Agassi's book on nationality is a worthless piece of paper. And Bergson, after the book was written, was pissed off with it, but he never went to tell Agassi that he told me that. Okay, the issue is not just the nationality, Larry, and the issue is how do we go and make two nations work together? Even though
I understand that, but that's the question. But what was the answer, or did he never come up with an answer?
He never came up. I came up with it. It's called Am Lo Levadad Yishkon. Okay, a nation does not stand by itself. Okay, and it comes from the Hebrew Bible. In the Hebrew Bible, it's written that the Jews are a nation by themselves, or whatever they meant there by nation. And I said that this idea of a Jews by themselves is the totality of nonsense. It's an impossibility in politics. It's not intellectual. It's nothing. Okay? In order to survive, which I told you already, the Israeli chief of intelligence already, Mr. Amit, wrote it down as an intellectual challenge. How do we get ourselves integrated into the region here? You have to understand, if we don't get integrated into the region, we cannot survive there. Today, we win the war. Tomorrow, we lose the war. People are getting killed. You have to come up with a different political dish. Bergson was struggling with it, but he hit it on the right. He knew exactly what he was talking about.
Well, what you're saying was he had the right principle, but he didn't actually have all the details worked out, which are very complicated.
That's correct. And it's not issues of language. In language, you can be intellectual. And by the way, he had foresight. Don't misunderstand. His words meant a lot to me and to many other people. But people in Israel just don't, or American Jews don't know how to express them. If you do a survey,
let me ask a question. There was a book published about Bergson's views. I think it was by Bernard Avishai. I'm not sure the name of the author. The Hebrew Republic. It was called the Hebrew Republic.
Yeah. He got it right.
And what do you think of that book? And what was the impact of that book?
It doesn't get to the bottom line. It doesn't get to the bottom line, which I tried to explain in my book. I used, as I told you, I used the Israeli chief of intelligence idea of it's impossible to live in peace in the region if we don't integrate ourselves into the region. We cannot be the 51 state of the United States.
Well, that's the issue, isn't it? Because if you've got the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Defense coming and telling Israel, bomb this, don't bomb that, do this, don't do that.
Absolutely.
We'll give you this bomb, but don't use landmines. You're not really a sovereign nation, are you?
That's correct. By the way, it's even more interesting that I always suggested, And by the way, I sent it to Arab, what you call Palestinian writers. I don't want to use the word Arabs because it's a derogatory word in Israel. Palestinians, I sent it to a few Palestinian writers in Jordan, in the whatever. I sent it to some people, but you see, they are also afraid of saying it. This thing, we need to get over this obstacle, okay, and to understand.
But to be fair, Ellie, hasn't Israel been pursuing relationships with Arab
No,
countries?
no, no. By the way, what did I try to say? What I'm trying to say, following what you just said, okay? America cannot be a mediator here. It's not America, and it's not Saudi Arabia, and it's not Russia, and it's not France. The Israelis and the Palestinians have to sit down together, by the way, including Hamas, okay, and sit together and figure out what are they going to do about their hostility and their future existence. That's what Bergson was talking about. But I'm translating it to you to English. This is the issue. It's not America. It's not Canada. It's not England. Okay, we have enough experience with those countries. Okay, we have to find our own way of existing together. And this is why I wrote the book, Who's an Israeli? Basically explaining that the need, that there has to be a path here. Okay? The book, Auschwitz on the
But
Potomac.
Ellie, nobody seems to have found that path. Are you saying nobody was looking and it's there if you can discover it?
They're not, listen, the solution to the Israeli-Palestinian issues, okay, are going to be found between Israelis and Palestinians. Nobody else can figure it out. No outside power or entity or sovereign nation will find the solution to this thing. Okay? This is what I'm writing about. Okay? And the Israelis better recognize this. You see, now you have the religious fanaticism that is in Israel is also in the Palestinian side. Okay? But that doesn't mean that all Palestinians and all Israelis are fanatics. You get it?
I understand, but I think it's people can get the general idea. And I remember when I talked to Bergson about this, he said, you know, the worst thing for Israel would be if they just built a giant ghetto. He said, first of all, from a national security point of view.
But that's exactly what they're doing.
And let me go on. He said, from a national security point of view, if you gather all the Jews in one place, one bomb, atom bomb, can kill everybody. And so just for preservation, that wouldn't be the best thing to do. And he said also that you had to have a country that was, as you said, a real country that was as you said, a nation among the nations. That was the idea.
Yeah, you got it right. You got it right. By the way, this is exactly what Bergson was talking about. Okay, by the way, law of return.
But that said, that's easier said than done, as we found out. I mean, in other words,
it's not easier said than done. If nobody, even if the most peaceful seeking peace in Israel, the most people seek peace seriously, and they work on it. The parties, the individuals, it doesn't matter. They don't grasp that the Palestinians are actually a nationality. Even though they didn't declare, I said, I just told you before, if the Palestinians were smart, okay, they just stand up in New York and say, we are a nationality, please recognize us. The world, please recognize it. How many nations do you think will not recognize them? Israel is going to be
none.
That's exactly the point. Everybody will recognize them. That's the end of the Israeli nonsense. So in order to avoid
that may be what's going to happen now, right?
I'm just saying, but think about it for a second. The Israelis got themselves into a labyrinth of words and biblical nonsense that they got, what Hillel Bergson used to call, they're thinking backwards instead of forwards. This is the Israeli thinking, is going backwards to the Bible instead of looking forward as a modern nation. This is the crisis here. The current crisis that we are observing with our eyes today. This is what it is about.
So do you think there's any chance of anyone in Israel figuring a way out of the crisis?
You know, I've written, I think, to more than 1,000 Israelis. Okay? I haven't seen a single Israeli yet who can answer my questions or take my work and try to criticize it. They become numb. And now some of those people were people who served in me in the military. Not only this, some of them are involved with the Israeli national security. Some of them are generals, some of them are professors involved with the national security of Israel. Some of them were my own professors. Okay? Some of them teach in West Point. Okay? And other American universities, and they cannot get it together. So am I in that case? I think I am.
Well, people thought Bergson was a nutcase. I guess we should wrap it up on that note, because a prophet is without honor in his own country. I understand you're working on putting together some of your writings, which I have to, full disclosure, I was the publisher of AUSCHWITZ on the Potomac, and another book may be coming on the Israeli situation. If you had one piece of advice to finish it up to the Israelis now on resolving the situation, it's interesting. There's two things. I think you have the internal Israeli question of nationality, which is not resolved, which would require, in my view, they have to have a constitutional convention, and the Israelis have to sit together, because now it looks like from the outside, each faction is just trying to force their idea on the other. Startup nation, synagogue nation, whatever, but that an Israeli nation with a sense of the whole, there's no, there's no deal there. So they need to set that in. But the second thing is they do need to come up with some sort of plan, as you said, for becoming integrated in the region de facto. And how you do that when your internal disputes are so severe. I mean, there's temporary unity now because of wartime, but as soon as it ends, everyone will go back to fighting again with each other. Yeah. How do you get that ability to negotiate? I mean, could it be that the reason Israel cannot negotiate with the Palestinians is because of the internal divisions in Israeli society being so profound, and they don't have a mechanism to deal with that? So wouldn't they really need to have they really need to have a constitutional convention, decide who we are as Israelis? Maybe we could have a Druze prime minister, if they're war heroes, more patriotic than the anti-Israeli Jews, And
why not a Palestinian? Why not a Palestinian prime minister?
Well, who knows? The fact is anything is possible. If you look at it as an Indian prime minister, so any country can come. The United States, Joe Biden's an Irish American. So the point is, any country can. And Donald Trump was a German American. We had some wars with Germany. The fact of the matter is, there are two tasks. I don't think even the writings you've done have the specifics that are needed. One, the Israeli Constitutional Convention to work out the internal issues, and secondarily, the endless Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which has just been going on forever. And I think you need to solve the internal before you can solve the external.
I think
until you know who you are, you can't
point.
Negotiate with anyone else.
Yeah, I think you have a very good point here. However, I said before we do that, internally or outwardly, or whatever you call it, we have to understand what are the components here that we are dealing with. Okay? And I suggest that we stop being hostile to Palestinians, and hopefully they'll stop being hostile to us. Okay? And we'll try together to work out some sort of a deal. First of all, it has to be an intellectual deal. I just want to tell you something interesting. You know, I conquered Gaza in 1967. I actually served there in the center of Gaza near the hospital, the famous, this idiotic hospital there. Okay? I was a soldier there. Unfortunately, I was wounded. I had an injury there, and I was in the hospital for a week or two. So my unit, I was there. I was not there with my unit after we entered. Okay, around 45 years later. Okay, I was sitting in my office in New York, and the son of the Gaza mayor in 1967, Mr. Ashawa, who was Musa Dayan, Moshe Dayan's best friend, a good friend of his, the son, who was at that time in his 60s, walked into my office in New York, and we started talking. And I said to him, "What are you doing now?" He says, "I'm running away from Gaza." Now, this is the richest, excuse me, the richest family in Gaza is the Ashawa family. This is the family, and he's running away. What does it tell you? And we couldn't even sit down and discuss it. The moment we started talking, he got himself so frustrated that he walked away from me. By the way, I also met the Palestinian leader the professor who was the Berzons University president. Okay, who wrote a piece of Mr. Nuseba, Sari Nuseba. He wrote a piece with one of my friends from the Israeli commando. Okay, Ami Ayalon, he was a general, an admiral in Israel. They wrote a piece together on how to achieve peace. I met him. He is also frustrated. I mean, but there are people around who are not carrying guns all the time or rockets. And we have to find a way how to resolve it by peaceful ways rather than this thing. And of course, it all starts with understanding who we are. Who is Eli Matz, and who is Larry, and who is Shmuel, who lives in Tel Aviv, or Muhammad, who lives in Ramallah. Do you get it?
Yeah, and you say that work still needs to be done. It hasn't been done yet.
Not yet. But somebody has to direct the research. Not a single American researcher, not a single Israeli researcher, not a single Palestinian researcher has dealt with that subject matter the same as Bergson dealt with it, or I'm trying to deal with it. Not a single one.
Let me ask the question. I remember years ago when I was making my movie about Bergson, Merlin showed me their peace plan from the Institute for Mediterranean Affairs. And at one point I had a copy, but I don't think I do anymore. Do you know where people might be able to see it? Has anyone scanned it and put it online?
I think I have it at home, but the best place will be Yale University. I think I brought most of the papers to them.
But that might be something that would be good if somebody would put it online.
By the
it's
way,
just something to think about.
But I have a Marilyn's book on Habib Bourguiba. If you remember, Marilyn wrote a book on the peace efforts of the president of Tunis, Habib Bourguiba. Okay, and the reason he wrote it because was that the author, the publisher of Jeune Afrique, Young Africa, was a friend of his. I don't know if you know that there was a magazine like this in Europe, Jeune Afrique, Young Africa, and he encouraged him to write that book on the Bourguiba proposal. Now, anyway, Marilyn Bergson, I tried. There were some, very few others who were involved, but nobody really was involved emotionally. There was, I think I told you that the most important book on Israel as a nation. It was written by my friend Professor Gershon whose PhD dissertation deals with the person who inspired Ludwig Wittgenstein. And Gershon wrote a book. It was translated after many years into English. It's called The Jewish Theocracy. And in that book, he analyzes the disaster of Jewish thinking in the last 2,000 years. And the only light, or what you call a little light in this book is discussion about Spinoza. Okay, and if anybody knows anything about Spinoza, Spinoza wrote the theological political tract, okay, in which he explains why the old Hebrew nation collapsed. Okay, so I mean, I spent hours and hours and hours with this gentleman. We became very good friends. That's the only Israeli book that has ever appeared today, also in English, that explains anything to anybody who wants to understand anything about the intellectual aspects of our Jewish civilization in the last 2,000 years.
And the name of the book is Jewish Geography by Gershon Weiler,
No,
is that right?
It's called Jewish Theocracy. Theokratia.
A Jewish Theocracy.
Theokratia Yehudit. Okay? And it was published by Amoved in Israel, which was one of the most respectful publishing houses in Israel. Okay? But nobody reads it.
All right. Well, I'll try and read it before our next interview. I think we should wrap up on that note. I'm going to give one more plug for your book, which is easier to read probably than Gershon Weiler. Auschwitz on the Potomac, 1943, Hillel Koch, The Attempt to Save European Jewry and the Birth of the Israeli Nation. And it's available everywhere, Amazon, local book dealers. You can order it through your library. And I understand you're working on some other book projects right now. We're going to be looking forward to that. And I guess that's all for this time. Wish you and Barbara a happy Hanukkah. And we'll stop recording now.
Thank you.